Merry meet, greetings and blessings. It's Amy Jean Gooslin, or Morgana Moonwater again, of the Coven of the Raven Moon and Sacred Elements in Flint. This is our third episode of our brand new video series that we're calling Witch Bits. Short informational clips of things related to Wicca and the practice of our craft. We hope you find them both helpful and fun. Today's topic is going to address some basic altar tools. Now, I have an altar set up here. The pieces that I have in place are located in the direction or the element that they're associated with, but that's a topic that we're going to save for another clip because these are just bits. We're just going to talk about the tools tonight. And I have multiples of some of these tools on the table just so that I can show you some various options. The first one that I'm going to show you is the Cauldron. Now, the Cauldron is a very classic, iconic tool of witches and Wiccans. This one in particular here I have had for a very long time. It is made of copper, so it helps to amplify the energy or the magical intent that I set on my spell work. However, ones like this aren't always readily available anymore. You actually maybe stand a little better chance getting them at a thrift shop or a resale shop than you do buying one brand new. Today, traditionally, if you hop online and you order what they're calling a cauldron, you're gonna get something that looks a little bit like this one in the center, okay? I tend to keep my cauldron in the center or to the north, the element and direction it's associated with. Now, to me in my practice, this is a little small, and I tend to use this as a smudge pot or a censer. And that is another one of the altar tools. A smudge pot or a censer is going to be something fireproof that you can burn in. You can burn incense, herbs, and resins. I have a charcoal lit inside this cauldron, or for me, censer in the center. This will heat up, it'll get hot, so I make sure to have a plate underneath it as well. Be conscious of linens and things that are flammable being close to it. And then this is going to be something that you can burn in safely. That's a little bit of dragon's blood that we have going. This is another example of a censer. And in this right now, we have a little piece of Palo Santo that is used for cleansing. This is also metal. This one is brass. What the important thing is if you use some glass pieces on their own, they may even be pretty and shaped as though they're appropriate for that, but they'll heat inappropriately and you'll get breaking and sometimes even exploding. So make sure that you practice safety first and you use something appropriate. So here behind my cauldron, I have two options to show you how to have a representation of the mother and father, or the goddess and the god, on your altar. See, with each of these tools, we have options that are very simple up to options that are very elaborate. The statues are a little elaborate, and these represent both the feminine and the masculine present in the divine and in the gods. Now, I also have an alternative for representing the goddess and the god here. We know, or we will learn a little later on, about some more correspondences, but the goddess and feminine energy corresponds with the moon, and we know that masculine energy and the god correspond with the sun. So see here, these simple sun and moon candle holders are actually being utilized to be god and goddess representations on the altar. So here's two options for that. In front of the cauldron here, I have a very simple pentacle. You always want to have a power symbol, protection symbol on your altar. A pentacle is one that's quite common. Pentagrams are used as well. The pentacle is going to be the image of the star with the circle around it. The pentagram is the star on its own. We'll do another section on symbols in magic soon, but that's one thing that can be commonly mistaken for each other. So this is our protection and blessing pentacle, and that always should be on our altar. From there, we're going to come over here to the west by the moon and our goddess symbol. And I have placed on the west side of the altar my chalice. The chalice correlates with the feminine energy and also with the element of water, which is associated in the east. The chalice is used for both ritual. It's used in the simple feast of cakes and ale. It's also used to make offering. So this is used in a lot of ways in ritual setting, and this is a chalice. Just in front of the chalice, I have my personal book of shadows. This doesn't necessarily have to be associated with any side of your altar. I tend to put it on the west side of my altar because this is my study and pursuit of the goddess and her teachings that is encased in my Book of Shadows. Often you'll hear people refer to them as grimoires as well. Some people choose to use those terms to represent slightly different things. Some people choose to use them interchangeable. That's really kind of up to you. But a grimoire and a Book of Shadows are both going to be a story of your journey, your spell work, your studying, contains spells, recipes, things of that nature. And mine is placed right here at the west. In front of that, I have my besom. And yes, this is a broom. It is used ritually. Ritual items are used to affect energy only. So a besom is never used to clean physical dirt. In the home, a great place to place these is above your front door to help usher in prosperity, or above your hearth to help keep it building and your legacy growing. When you place them on the floor, if you do, it's best to have them elevated or hung, but if placed on the floor, you always want to have those bristles up to hold negativity away. Placing it down on the ground with bristles down will allow negativity to come into your space. This is protective. The cleansing, which in removing, we're going to want to move in a counterclockwise fashion. So we would move from the right to the left and brush the negative energy away, but we wouldn't touch the floor while we were doing this because it is a ritual tool. It's used for the ethereal plane and for energy. And this is a besom or a witch's broom. Now here I have a selection of wands in the southern quadrant of the altar. Wands can go from very simple to very elaborate, and it does not affect their effectiveness or their strength in your magical work or ritual practice. This first one I have is a very simple willow wand, and it is wrapped in a copper wire to help amplify the power. Willow is for healing and for love, so this would be kind of a healing wand. And though it's simple, I think it's quite lovely. They're very eloquent, and I know that they're super effective. Another one that we have here is one that I made myself. This entire wand is actually fashioned out of copper, and it is wrapped in brass. I have stones on both the base and the tip. On the bottom, I have grounding stones and protection stones, tiger eye and garnet. On the top, I have mixed stones for amplification connection, balancing chakras with a quartz point at the end to help direct that intent. That's one that I actually made myself. I've had it for quite some time, so the copper is a little bit discolored, but it works just as great as it did the very first day. Probably actually even better. This wand here is an example by one of my artists. This is actually a piece of petrified wood, which is very, very interesting and unique. It is topped with a large natural quartz point and a cowrie shell. This is specially designed for feminine issues, women's magic and healing. This one's quite lovely. It was actually put together by Nick Gardner. He's fantastic, and I really like this piece of his. Now they can go from very simple to very elaborate. This one is quite elaborate. This is one that our faith has brought in. And this is actually made of sunstone. The wand itself is stone. There's a quartz point at the top to help direct the energy. There's a quartz sphere at the base to help build and amplify that energy. And then there are stones all up the base and shaft of the wand to balance each of our individual chakras, going from the root, sacral, solar plexus, heart, throat, third eye, and crown. So that prepares you for magical work as you practice it. And then this one, yes, agreed, is very elaborate and quite beautiful. This one was a gift from a good friend of mine for Yule this year. And what we're seeing here is a very, very large quartz point at the top to amplify the intent. There are multiple quartz points hooked to silver. Silver is to pull in the feminine energy, moon magic, and the divine. I have 3 more points here. On the back side, we see the rose. The rose is the flower of and one of the symbols of my mother patron Isis, the Virgin Mary. It's a very big symbol in my practice. The actual wand itself is all one piece unit and wrapped together, and it lights up for some of my more fun and public rituals in the dark. We'll be using this tonight at Pagan Pathways Temple in Madison Heights, Michigan. It's a great place. If you haven't checked it out, make sure that you look them up. They're right on John R., and it's a fantastic facility. We'll be there in a couple hours for our new moon ritual. But this is another example of a very lovely and elaborate example of a wand. However, keep in mind, for their effectiveness, none of these works any better than the other. Your intent is always going to be the most powerful ingredient to your magic. Now, over here in the Eastern Quadrant, I have, this is a mortar and pestle. I believe I showed that to you as I put the dragon's blood in. This is for grinding of resins, herbs, sometimes even small stones. You always want to have one of those on your table if it's actually a working altar. Also in the Eastern Quadrant, we have the bell. Now, bells are known to tonally clear and cleanse a space, and sometimes they're used to signify both the beginning and the end of ritual or magic work, and they're traditionally associated with the element of air in the Eastern Quadrant. Candle snuffer is here. We are taught that we should never extinguish one element with another, so blowing out a candle is something that we do try to avoid in most lineages of the practice, so snuffers are used. However, if you get caught in a pinch, I learned a great trick from my eldering mentor, High Priest Waylon Raven of the Coven of the Raven Mist, and he taught me how we use the breath of the goddess to extinguish a candle. And that is about setting intent to your breath, communicating and showing honor to the goddess and the divine, and instead of air. Also over here in the quadrant, I have some examples of Athames. Athame is a tricky one because it is traditionally associated with the Eastern Quadrant, with the element of air. This is a masculine energy. This is an energy of movement. However, it is both a common misconception and sometimes, too, a very intentional decision to move this association from the Eastern Quadrant to the South. Honestly, either is going to work fine, whichever one you're most comfortable with, because your intent is always what's going to amplify that magic. So I have first my own personal Athame here, and this Athame is dedicated to the goddess Isis as well. So there's a lot of Egyptian symbolism on it. None of this is necessary for effective practice. I have scarab for protection, the mother goddess, and hieroglyphic empowering and protective symbols. The blade is serpentine, and it is not live steel. This is a dull blade, and that is fine because the most important part about your Athame is that it is only used on the ethereal plane. It is only used to cut energy. You never physically cut anything with your Athame, just like you never physically sweep anything with your besom. Now, admittedly, that's not the most traditional style of Athame. Mine is very specialized. An Athame traditionally is a black-handled knife. So I have a much simpler example of that here. This one happens to have a spider on the handle, but a black-handled knife is what the Athames were to begin with. Now there is another type of knife that I don't have an example of on the table because personally I don't use it much in my practice. That knife is called a bowline. That's going to have a curved blade and traditionally a white handle. That is a sharp knife, and it's because it is intended to cut things on the physical plane while you're in ritual or circle, to cut either herbs or small pieces of wood, ribbons, or to carve something into a candle. That one is intended for physical cutting. I don't use that a lot, so I don't have one here to show you today. But the Athames are here, and they're quite lovely. And these are just some basics. Remember, our craft is full of beautiful options and areas to explore. It doesn't ever have to be complicated. We can keep it as simple as we'd like, or make it as large and as celebratory as we feel compelled to. And this is a good place to start physically getting moving forward on your practice. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope maybe you learned a little bit. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Witch Bits. Blessed be.